we're doing the book tour, and all of a sudden I get this email that the Huffington Post is saying that George W. Bush plagiarized some of his book. Like, what's he talking about? Because I knew that he and a former speechwriter had worked on all of it together. Like, what are you talking? So I read it. I'm like, oh my gosh. So this reporter for Huffington Post wrote that in Bob Woodward's book from like 3 years ago, there's a passage in there in which Bob Woodward quotes somebody who was a source close to the president who said this about the Iraq War. And therefore, they said that George W. Bush, who had then written that in Decision Points, that therefore he was plagiarizing Bob Woodward. And I was like, obviously, he's the source close to the president, is the president, you dumbass. Sorry, can we say that on here?
I remember during the Iraq War and you being up there and all the things. I lived on the Upper West of New York City, the most liberal place on earth. And, you know, outside Zabar's, they'd have the book tables, and every book was George W. Bush is the devil and evil and all of that stuff. Where now the media, because he's not Trump, they sort of treat him like a nice guy. He's also a little older. He paints now, so he's kind of good now, and Trump is the ultimate evil. Do you see that sort of always churning through like every 10 years where the media takes someone they hate, now they're good because they have a new bad guy, and that these pieces will always sort of shift around?
I have a great story for you about that. Marlin Fitzwater was the press secretary for Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. So for 8 years, he was the press secretary for 8 years. I joke with him that he could never have done that in the age of social media. But he told me that, well, actually, I invited him to my house in October of 2008. I invited all of my staff from the press room. I made them all read his book, one of the best books ever written in Washington, D.C. as a memoir. It's called Call the Briefing by Marlin Fitzwater. It's fantastic. His storytelling is spectacular. So he came and we had a little book club. And he delivered a message to all of us. And he said, you know, I know you're feeling like your boss is really being dragged through the mud. Our approval ratings were terrible. This is right after the financial crisis, as you can imagine. And he said, let me tell you a story about in 1992, and January 92, they had lost, or 93, they had lost to Bill Clinton. And he said it was so mortifying to lose to Bill Clinton. And he said, when we left that day, he said, my head was hanging so low because I thought no one will ever, ever understand and see what a great man George H.W. Bush was. Well, that changed. You know, time has a way of changing perspective. And 43 used to say, when I would prep him for interviews toward the end, I said, sir, they're going to ask you what you think your legacy is going to be. And he said, look, you know, last year I read 3 books about George Washington. And if historians are still analyzing the first president, then the 43rd doesn't have a lot to worry about because he'll never know. And he would point out that Abraham Lincoln died thinking that the country thought he was a failure. So, yes, I think that the fact that 43 could help me lift my gaze from current crisis and current feelings and lift my gaze and understand there's a longer view, that really helped me in my life, actually, overall, not just in politics.
Yeah, I love that. Can you talk a little bit about just generally what it's like sort of working at Fox and being in the eye of the storm where often you guys are as critiqued as the politicians you're supposed to be talking about? And this is a particularly unique thing to Fox, where every given day we know that Media Matters is watching you guys, waiting for you to stumble over some word. Then they clip that video, they get it out to HuffPo, they get it to Vox. They try, you know, they lie about timelines. Greg's dealing with a version of this right now related to coronavirus. How, in a weird way, the stories then become about you, or that, you know, somebody's boycotting Tucker on any given day. Just that whole thing.
So I have a ton of respect for the media relations department at Fox News because they are dealing with they are drinking from a fire hose every single day. And we have strong personalities at the network, and we have the freedom to say what we want to say. I'm usually pretty much left alone. I guess maybe I don't say anything that controversial or interesting for them to bother. But I don't like it when someone who is expressing an opinion and then it gets distorted. I really can't stand that. And this is an example that I wanted to mention. It just came to mind. It doesn't have exactly to do with Fox, but it's a good example of my experience of dealing with the media. And you mentioned Huffington Post. So I did the PR for George W. Bush's memoir, Decision Points, when it came out in 2010. And we're out there. The book is launched, going pretty well, although 43, boy, he had not done interviews in 2 years, and he was not excited to see the press again, I'll tell you that.
I bet. Well, he often presidents disappear for a little while, but he really just went under the radar. Finally, there was that picture of him painting, and people were like, oh, what happened?
Yeah, he said for a long time, he said, I don't seek the Klieg lights. I don't want this attention. And he knew that there was another chapter, and that he had watched his dad be such a gracious former president, and that was his role model. But back to the book tour. So we're doing the book tour, and all of a sudden I get this email that the Huffington Post is saying that George W. Bush plagiarized some of his book. Like, what's he talking about? Because I knew that he and a former speechwriter had worked on all of it together. Like, what are you talking? So I read it. I'm like, oh my gosh. So this reporter for Huffington Post wrote that in Bob Woodward's book from like 3 years ago, there's a passage in there in which Bob Woodward quotes somebody who was a source close to the president who said this about the Iraq War. And therefore, they said that George W. Bush, who had then written that in Decision Points, that therefore he was plagiarizing Bob Woodward. And I was like, obviously, he's the source close to the president, is the president, you dumbass. Sorry, can we say that on here?
Hey, you can say anything here. Come on now.
I remember how mad I was. And it just so happened that the publisher of the book was also the publisher of Arianna Huffington's books. So I was getting nowhere with the reporter to take it down. And so she said that she would call and get her to handle it. And do you know, they would not take it down? And so I'm not a stranger to this behavior and how they treated him or other conservatives or Trump now today. It's unfortunate, but you just have to work around it.
Yeah, but it must take a certain amount of your mental stamina during the day, right? Knowing that these guys are watching you, or even when you're just talking on your show and you might accidentally say ass, and then you go, uh-oh.
Oh, yeah, like that time that I said that the guy carrying the alligator with his mouth taped in the convenience store, and it was during One More Thing, and I said, what an asshole. And oh my gosh, and that's unusual for me. And it caused such an uproar, but we turned it into something funny. And actually, the president of the company got a call from his mom, and she said, please don't get mad at Dana. Don't get her in any trouble. She didn't mean to say it. It was an accident. And besides, she was right. The guy was an asshole.
He was. There you go.
Florida
Can
man.
you talk a little bit about the general culture at Fox? Because, until I started going on a bunch of these shows like a year ago, I don't know, I probably thought whatever maybe the mainstream zeitgeist is, but I know that, I've been doing your show basically once a week for a while now, and I go on Greg and Tucker. Nobody asks me anything. The first few times I went on Tucker, they would say, oh, do you have some ideas that you want to talk about? But now you guys invite me, I go on, we don't discuss anything. I know that I could say anything in those few minutes, and you may not agree with me, but you'd be okay with it, and we can joke around and the rest of it. And people always say to me, well, Dave, why don't you go on CNN and MSNBC? And I'm like, well, they don't invite me.
What's the point?
As long
they
as,
don't, yeah.
Well, I guess what's the point? Also, nobody's watching, but they don't invite me. I can't just show up. I actually have showed up.
What's the point if you think you're not going to be allowed to just be yourself and express your views and have that respected?
Yeah, but the meme would be, oh, Fox News is just pushing out talking points to everybody. But I just know it's not true because you guys let me say whatever I want.
Yeah, I've been there since April of 2009. I've never once been asked to say something, press a message, anything. And this has never happened to me or to anybody that I know. And I think one of the best things about Fox is a culture of respecting everybody as an individual, but working as a very close-knit team.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about politics instead of nonstop yelling, check out our politics playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.